Number one, we're gonna be looking at why distance runners, even elite marathoners, actually train quite a bit less than other endurance athletes who are elite, like cross-country skiers, rowers, swimmers, triathletes, and bikers. They actually train a lot more. Number two, we're gonna be looking at the 10% rule and debunking it. I do not want you to be increasing your volume by 10% per week. That's not what elite distance runners do, and the facts are in. And it's not just gonna be opinion, this is gonna be the broken down science. Dr. Hill's taking a nap. Hey, Dr. Hill, science. Did you say science? I did. It's his favorite term. So let's dive into the research here. This is a breakdown of the meta-analysis that was done on hundreds of elite runners. Similar results. Now, maybe you're not gonna go as far as they did, but we can model the kind of structure and the way that they do it. So you ready? Let's go! Optimal training volume, what elite athletes actually do. We often think that more is better. And it kind of makes sense because if you take someone who's beginning running and they're running, 10 miles a week, and then you look at an elite runner who's running 150 miles per week, clearly there's a huge discrepancy, and probably that beginning runner is going to get a lot better by just running more. But you don't want to just run more and more and more. There's this adage that you've heard many times before. I hear this repeated even by well-known coaches, and I wholeheartedly disagree, that we should increase 10% per week.
This is all wrong.
And then maybe cut back every 4 weeks or so. Now that is way too fast. There's a chart in your Run Elite book that shows if you started at 30 miles per week and you increased 10% per week, even with a cutback week every 4 weeks, it's not that long before you're running 100 miles a week. The formula just doesn't work. It breaks down really quickly when you extrapolate it to 6 months or a year. If you do that, it just compounds. It's too much. So elite runners don't do that. One of the things they do is they increase 10% per year in their early development years. And this is with marathoners and track runners. But instead of skipping around into all these anecdotes, I'm gonna take you through a kind of step-by-step breakdown of volume in elite distance running. Title of this meta-analysis is The Training Characteristics of World-Class Distance Runners, an integration of scientific literature and results-proven practice. This is one of the best papers I've ever read on the topic. It links to not just evidence-based research, lots of that as well, lots and lots. There's hundreds of sources that are used here, but it links specifically to the actual training of runners who we know and love. I mean, you name them, they're all on here. It's like a meta-analysis of all the training that we know. So training volume. Now, in the marathon, elite runners run, I'm gonna give you a time, not a distance. They run 500 to 700 hours trained per year. Sounds like a lot. Okay, we'll come back to that because is it a lot? Track runners, they train 450 to 600 hours per year. Now, the difference in the marathoner versus the track, they're both training hard, but the marathon runner is running at a lower intensity for their workouts, but the track runner also includes strength training, power training, and plyometric training, especially 800-meter runners. You got to do strength, plyometric, and power training. Mile, 5K, a little bit of that. As the distance goes up, we exchange power training for volume of training, and that's what we see across the board. But it's interesting. You would think that elite distance runners, they just spend all day training and then sleeping and recovering, and that's what, if you're really committed to an Olympic gold medal, that's what you would do. But their total volume in terms of time in a year is actually far less than most other endurance sports. If we look at cross-country skiing, cycling, triathlon, swimming, and rowing, across the board with all those other endurance sports, they train 800 to 1,200 hours per year.
But I'm a fan of that. I'd love to go there evenings, but I'm too busy doing things.
Now remember, even an elite marathoner, 500 to 700. An elite swimmer or triathlete might be 800 to 1,200. This is a massive increase. So are distance runners, elite distance runners, just lazy? We know that's not the case. Why is there such a difference? Well, the difference is chiefly because running is a weight-bearing exercise. Swimming is non-weight bearing. Cycling is mostly non-weight bearing. Rowing is non-weight bearing. Even triathlon is somewhat weight bearing, but then only a third of the implements they do. So they can train at a higher volume. When you're weight bearing and you're striking the ground, now running is jumping while you're moving forward. And so every time you jump, you displace your body weight. And when you come back down, you hit the ground with a multiple of your body weight. Depends on your form. But it's gonna be probably at least 2 times your body weight, maybe 4 times your body weight, depending on your form. And that is a limiting factor for how much you can train because of the impact and because of the rapid plyometric action. When you run, let's say you land on your forefoot, like a really efficient runner, nice forefoot strike. You take your plantar fascia and your Achilles and you load it like a rubber band. You give it a stretch. And then when you toe off, you release that energy. It's a stretch. and then release, stretch, release. There is also an eccentric muscle contraction. Now, a quick review, a lot of you know what this is, but eccentric means that a muscle is lengthening as it's contracting. So a big dumbbell in my hand, it just depends, but my bicep contracts. We all get that. That's a concentric muscle contraction. And that's what we're doing in biking, in swimming. Now, I understand bikers also pull. I understand. But for the most part, like pushing through or swimming or cross-country skiing or something, it's concentric. But if we lower that weight nice and slowly, this muscle is lengthening as it's still contracting. We're not using the tricep. We're lengthening, still using the bicep. That kind of contraction is what you're using in your quads and somewhat in your calves when you're running. And this kind of muscle loading really beats your body up. So you need to have a lower volume. What do elite distance runners do to compensate? Because they're not lazy. They're some of the hardest working athletes in the world. They do two things. So write this down for yourself. If you want to increase your volume, one of the things you want to do is you want to do doubles, 2-a-days. Some elite ultra runners, they do 3-a-days or even 4-a-days. Now, I actually just got in touch with any ultra runners here. Anybody know who Pam Reed is? Before Courtney Dauwalter and Camille Herring came along, she was the GOAT by far, hands down. She won the Badwater Ultra outright, beat all the men, and she won Western States. This lady is a badass. I talked with her on the phone for about an hour and a half last week, and we're gonna do an interview together. She's a really cool lady, but in her book, I believe it's called The Last Mile, she talks about running 4 times per day. She'd run a 10K 4 times per day, every day, and then long runs and races on the weekend. Now, rowers don't do that. Swimmers, maybe 3 times a day, 2 or 3 times a day. Cyclists, maybe 2 times a day, maybe 3, maybe, probably not. But with running, the higher the volume goes, we have to chunk it down into multiple shorter bursts. So that's step 1. Number 2, so the thing that's gonna limit you with the amount of volume you can do is essentially your injury risk because of the impact and the plyometric load. That's really your take-home point here. How do we mitigate against that? Well, we do doubles or even triples or quadruples if you want. And second is you change the surface that you're running on. Most, even elite marathoners, they do much of their running, I dare say a majority of it, on dirt roads or trails or even squishy, soft tracks. Most of it's not on the road. Now, of course, if you're training for a road marathon, you have to train on the road. But that's one of the ways we can mitigate the impact. Run on a slightly softer, more forgiving surface. Since we're talking about mitigating injury risk here and improving recovery, there's a device that every runner should have. Check this out. I've used a lot of massage guns in my life, and this one is by far the best. It's by Bob and Brad. Now, it comes with attachments that you can use that either will make it hot or cold, or you can do it as I use it with just the standard tip on this, but it's like a nice pointed tip that gets right deep into your muscles. It comes in a box that looks like this. It's pretty awesome, and I've got a coupon code for you in the description below. That's number 2. So we know that it's not the movement itself that causes the overtraining, it's the impact. And that's good news, because if you're having some kind of injury in your body, it might be because of the motion, but it's probably because of the loading of your body weight when you're under that motion. If we can reduce the impact, you're gonna be able to train more. How do we reduce the impact? Well, you run doubles, you run slower, you do a lot of base training, you run on softer surfaces, you improve your biomechanics, and the biggest one is you shed excess body fat, body weight anywhere you can do it. This will bring us to shoes in a minute, because you can shed weight off the shoes, and we've done this as a society of runners over decades, right? So that's one of the other ways you can do it, is by better shoes. I am not a fan, personally, of super high-tech shoes. I think that our foot is designed for running. Couldn't be any other way. We want to get out of the way of what our foot can do. So we want to be in a shoe that is low drop or zero drop. And we want a shoe 100% definitely across the board that is shaped like your foot. So I call this a foot-shaped toe box. Not wide, just shaped like your foot, not a taper. Now, those are the standards. You should be probably in a low drop shoe, foot shape, but you can have a stack height on that shoe, an additional cushion. There's pros and cons to this. This is not a review of shoes, but with the advent of the super shoe. Now, if you look at the Alpha, Next Percent, Zoom, Fly, Elite, like all these carbon fiber, crazy shoes that have come out, they have a couple things in common. They're all uber crazy, super ridiculously lightweight, very lightweight. These trainers are way less than track spikes used to weigh when I was in high school. It's nuts. So when we reduce the weight, there's less impact. These shoes, these elite Kipchoge shoes, all these things, they have a very high stack height. They're really high up off the ground. They're also made of superior material. It used to be just rubber from like industrial rubber back in the 70s. And now it's like this really high tech, either EVA or TPU material, and even some other new age kind of space materials that are getting tested now. But they give you a lot of elastic recoil. So they mimic the load that you get on your Achilles and your plantar fascia. That stretch we were just talking about, shoes today can mimic that elastic rebound with a carbon fiber plate, with a little bit extra cushioning. So shoes are a big one. Now, the fourth way that runners compensate is through fluctuations in how they train throughout the year. This is what I call periodization, meaning that you're gonna spend some time working on your volume and then some time honing in your speed and specificity. Doesn't it make sense if you're training for the marathon to do marathon pace running at a high volume throughout the year? Sorta, but good luck trying to increase the volume of that without getting hurt. Now you're just racing a marathon every week for your long run. It ain't gonna work. Now, basic periodization means you spend a good amount of time building a foundation of aerobic capacity, of neuromuscular coordination, of strength, of power. But during base training, that's when you level up your volume. Because remember the trade-off here, leveling up volume, but you're not doing a lot of intensity. So we can get the volume way up. Then we cap our volume or even reduce it slightly and increase the intensity. And that's how we start to peak towards a peak performance. So if you want to increase your training, you got a bunch of hacks here, but one of them is also to be periodized. The other thing is that you might take on additional injury risk by running a little more than your body can handle for short periods of time. Short periods of time. This would be either in your base training or possibly before a big competition, provided that you have a taper maybe. But you can have periods of training. Maybe it's a week, a month, or a 3-month period where you really go big, but your body's gonna blow up if you keep that up, so then you ease it back. And then you blow it up again and you contract. Now this is a strategy you can use to get more volume in intermittently without a huge additional risk of injury. Okay, elite runners, they spend normally 8 to 12 weeks in base training. I suggest that you spend even more. These are elite runners who maybe have decades of huge volume, and they're also maybe genetically gifted where they're not getting injured, and they have resources maybe for massage and better sleep and nutrition. If you're a professional runner, you have a lot of time to sleep and you have a team working for you. Okay, but 8 to 12 weeks of base training for elite runners, and they often start, so after a break, they'll come back to base training and they're starting week 1 at 40 to 60% of what they want their peak to be. We can just call this 50%. So if you take some time off and you're recovering, come back with about 50% of the volume that you want, whatever that is. And then over about 3 months, you just increase it, the duration, but not the intensity. That's what elite runners do. And the way that they increase the duration is, hear this. This is like a huge takeaway point. First, you want to increase your frequency. If you're running 3 days per week and you really want long-term success in your running, most of you are running more, but hey, maybe you're running 4 or 5 or even 6. You want to increase your frequency, not just how long the run is. So you move to 6 days per week. Or if you're running 6, but you still want a day off, you do a couple of doubles. Now, elite runners, they run, whether it be a marathon runner or a track runner, although their volumes are different. Both of them run about 11 to 14 sessions per week. There's no difference between an elite marathoner and an elite 5,000, 1,500 meter runner. Same amount of sessions. They get their frequency up first. Second, you increase the duration of these runs. And this could be your weekly, bread and butter kind of run or your long run. Now, one of the reasons elite marathoners have more training hours in a month, in a year, is because simply their long run is an hour or an hour and a half longer than their middle distance counterparts. Lower intensity though. You see, it's the same impact load. It's just mitigated, more easy intensity. And that's that whole 80-20 thing, which isn't exactly true. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. Most of your training is done easy. Build your volume up. Now, just for fun, across the board of all of the elite runners that were researched here, and there's about 400 or so, elite marathoners run about 160 to 220 kilometers per week. So we're looking at 100 to 150 miles. And track runners, it's about 130 to 190 kilometers per week. And we already know why, because we've talked about that. But it's still 11 to 14 sessions. So 2 final points for you. First one is that it's rare that you're gonna find a truly elite track or marathon runner who didn't start in their teenage years or even before. They normally don't come on the scene. You might not hear of them until they're in their 20s, but they've been on the scene in their own country doing their own thing. You just haven't heard of them. They started in their teens and they increased their volume by 10% annually, not per week, but they sustained it. So throughout their middle teenage years and all throughout their mid-20s, like beginning to mid-20s, it's ramping up slow. Imagine that, 10% per year, not 10% per week, like Runner's World magazine might tell you, not even 10% per month. This is a steady drip that they just keep consistent for 1 or 2 decades. Once they hit their mid-20s, normally most elite runners have hit the kind of volume that they're going to run throughout their career. And the reason for this is they've probably maxed out. They're probably in that 100 to 150 miles for a marathoner or slightly below 90 to 120 for a track runner. They probably hit that. And going above it, remember to the back of our training here today, if they go above that, their injury risk goes sky high. So they keep that volume there and they do other things. They change their specificity, they work on their intensity. And the final thing for you is if you want to hack all of this, it's not the most popular thing. I'm one of the few coaches you're gonna find who like emphasizes this, although we all know it. We don't like to talk about it as a society, is reduce body weight. If you want to run more volume, reduce body weight. That's huge. Okay, you have less impact. Great. When you eccentrically load a muscle, it's eccentrically loaded less. Great. And because of that, you'll get less injured. Great.
Really great.
So you'll have more consistency in your running and you can train at a higher volume. Simple. If it was only so simple to reduce our body weight, but it is simple. Currently, I'm not telling you to do this, just to let you know where I am. I'm on day 14 of just juice. I'm doing a juice cleanse. I'm going through about 8 to 10 of these per day. It's a lot. It's ridiculous. I get up to pee 4 times in the night. This is not something I'm going to do forever. 1 more week of this, back to raw. But even me, skinny distance runner, I lost 3 pounds last I measured myself just on the juice cleanse. Elite distance runners are skinny, are they not? Now there's a graph in the book also that shows the average BMI of male and female elite distance runners and the average BMI of normal folks who are still athletes. And it's way lower. Also, you go faster. So you can train more, you get less injured, you go faster, you're more consistent. It's really the magic bullet here. But to review, 4 things you can do if you want to increase your volume. Number 1, you want to increase your frequency. Number 2 is you want to run on softer surfaces. Number 3 is you might want to evaluate your shoes. And number 4 is have fluctuations in your training focus. That's called periodization. And the final, like big bubble around all of it, none of it matters if we're gaining weight. Now, if you gain weight intentionally because you're putting on muscle, okay. But you don't see Kipchoge maxing out his bench press and getting huge pecs for a reason, because it's extra weight to have to carry, more injury risk. All right, that's it for our training. Hope you enjoyed the breakdown of that research. If you liked that, you might like this video right here, which is on the same research, but instead of looking at training volume, we look at training intensity. Where to put your fast runs, your tempo runs, your threshold runs. I think you'll really like it right here. Hey, Dr. Hill, what are you doing?
Oh, I'm just reading a book.
What book are you reading?
It's called Run Elite, Train and Think Like the Greatest Runners of All Time.
Oh, that looks pretty good. It's actually the book that I wrote. Now, if you want to learn more evidence-based scientific principles that you can use in order to accelerate your running, you can pick up a copy on Amazon. I recorded the audio myself as well. If you prefer audiobook, you can pick up your copy today. The reviews speak for themselves. I'll see you on the next video. This has been Andrew Snow.
And Dr. Hill.
We'll see you on the next one. Thank you.